You are new to the Maria community. Hi, my name is Monica. I'm the founder and CEO of Maria. I'm so grateful that you're here. I am a PMDD warrior myself, and this is the reason that Maria exists today and why Mandy and I connected. I'm so grateful to have Mandy as part of our amazing team, our amazing community, and she's going to share some amazing knowledge with us all today. Mandy is the founder of Reveal Functional Nutrition, which is a dietetics and functional nutrition practice that is supporting women with PMDD. So the work that she is doing and the expertise that she brings to this community is absolutely unmatched because she has day-to-day clinical experience with patients in this space. So grateful for all of her knowledge. It is amazing all that she knows. I can never imagine. Um, she is very powerful. And so thank you, Mandy, for being here with us today, for putting this together. And I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro. And one thing I always like to do before we dive in, we're going to get super sciencey today. We're going to really dig in. If it feels okay to you, just shake it out, take a big breath, exhale, show yourself a little, and this won't turn into a yoga session, I promise, but just show yourself a little appreciation for showing up for yourself today and making this time. And thank you for sharing your time with me. So everyone has been sharing their cycle day, their location. Feel free to keep putting that in the chat. It's always fun to see where everyone is from. I always love, I'm talking every single week to people with PMDD around the world, which is really, really incredible. So thank you all for coming. And also want to acknowledge, as we're starting, that today is the last day of PMD Awareness Month in 2025. So again, we're here from all around the world because we have this shared experience, and it doesn't define us, but it connects us in a really unique way. So whether you're here because you suspect you have PMDD, or you're newly diagnosed, or you're what I would call a PMDD OG, you've been diagnosed for a while, you've been around that PMDD block, I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you take away something new today. Obligatory disclaimer that I put in all workshops: this is not medical advice. I'm not acting as a medical professional talking to you all, so we'll get that out of the way. So first, a little intro, and really answering the question, who am I and why do I care so much about this? And Monica started to introduce me. This is always the most awkward part for me because I'm from Minnesota. I'm humble. I don't like listing out all of my credentials. So I asked ChatGPT to describe me. And it must know that I love alliteration because it put root cause revealing, rebel researcher, PMDD pioneer. And so I thought that was quite cute. So as she mentioned, I'm a dietitian by trade, but in some ways I don't feel like a dietitian. It doesn't feel like it encompasses everything that we do, because while nutrition is so hugely impactful, I'm trained in a systems-based functional medicine approach that looks at the whole person, and nutrition included and beyond. And so for me, what I'm obsessed with and what I spend way too much time researching and digging into is learning more about the science of PMDD, what's driving that, and then how do we apply it in a way that actually helps people find relief and more freedom in their lives. And so I have my own lived experience with it that I'll share kind of sprinkled in today, but it's made me really dedicated and stubborn and just committed to helping people stop losing days to PMDD, to stop having to make their lives so much smaller, so all of you can go out in the world and live your purpose. So that's what I do and why I do it. And as I share about my own cycle, and we'll be talking about, I hope, hopeful messages today, I want you to know that it's coming from a place where I've been at my own, let's call them PMDD or menstrual cycle rock bottoms. I've taken medical leave due to PMDD and depression. And in a strange way, it's also been the source of some of my most profound realizations and personal growth and things that have pushed me to evolve. And so, yeah, if you're here and you've tried everything, that's the focus of the topic today. And I always joke with my clients that we don't mess around when it comes to PMDD. We leave no stone unturned, and we're going to start that today. All right. And just want to acknowledge my team quick. This isn't really about me. I think of it as a movement. And so I'm honored to be growing this incredible team. And it's really, my mission has expanded to them too. We're growing this team of PMDDers, helping PMDDers. Everyone on the team either has lived experience with PMDD or ADHD or menstrual challenges. They have their own health journey that really drives their passion to support our mission. And that mission is to build a new model in thinking about menstrual health and mental health, one that's rooted in like systems-based, root cause-based thinking, not quick fixes. So that's who we are. All right, a little more about today. All right. Before we dive in, I just want to say there's a lot that goes unanswered about PMDD, and I'm not here to pretend I have all the answers. I definitely don't have a magic pill. I wish I did. But what I do want to share is based on the research I've been digging into and my lived experience and all these years of working with hundreds of people navigating PMDD. And I'm learning every single week and every single day. Even I was updating and revising this webinar based on things I've learned just in the last few months. Because like I said, I'm obsessed and I'm always kind of turning, uncovering new layers to all of this. So my goal today is to take what you need, that perhaps it's a new perspective, perhaps it's to realize that you have options, that you have choice, that there's no one size fits all, cure all type of thing. And so whatever it is that you need, I hope you walk away with one little nugget of information that supports you moving forward. And I also want to just share that we'll be talking about our approach, but this workshop is not focused on our programs and services and what they are and what we do. We're not going to get into those details. If you have questions about that, I'll share my contact information. So my intention though is whoever is on your support team, that you walk away with the knowledge to ask different questions, tools to advocate for yourself, or perhaps even like a new language to start having different and deeper conversations with your providers, whether that's in the holistic space or the conventional space. So really the point is you deserve to have a care team that really sees the whole you, and you'll get that message as we talk about that today. All right. Second. Okay, so PMDD comes with a lot of questions. What causes it? Why do some treatments work for others but not for me? The most common question I hear is, why have I only been offered an SSRI and birth control? Or I've done those and those haven't worked. Why? Those are the main questions that I get, and we're going to be talking about some of those today, and I hope bringing new light to those questions. So let's take a look. I just want to start with something super hopeful. I was actually sharing this with Monica the other week, where went to an IAPMD webinar, and they shared this graph. And since 2020, like there's been more studies on PMDD than ever before. You can see on the graph, there's like this big uptick. And it was really, really cool. And so when we're in the thick of it, it never feels fast enough. It never feels like there's enough research or enough information. But this sparked something in me that made me feel hopeful and encouraged that there's so many people, so many researchers with boots on the ground looking into this stuff. And what I do is I aim to translate this emerging research with what we see in real clients to create those practical tools. And with that frustration sometimes that there's not enough research, or this sense that research is catching up, I think that's really true. It's catching up to what we've already known about our bodies for years. And you'll hear that theme throughout as we talk about some new research that's come out. All right, we are going to the science of PMDD, what causes PMDD from the research perspective, and then we're going to layer on the functional medicine perspective on top of that. A lot of you, I would guess, are super savvy. Perhaps you read the research studies yourself, or you're following things on social media, or you're learning lots in whatever way that you're learning it. So some of this beginning part might be a recap for some of you, but let's just get all on the same page. All right. So just to understand this graph, this little red line, this is from a research study, shows where the symptoms take off in the cycle. You can see that second half of the cycle, the luteal phase. And the current model of PMDD tells us that it's not caused by hormonal imbalance. It's caused by a heightened brain and nervous system sensitivity to normal hormonal fluctuations. And I feel like everyone is catching up and to that understanding and agreement in that. And this sensitivity shows up at the cellular level. And even on brain imaging studies, they can see altered activity in brain regions tied to like emotional regulation and hormone signaling. So it's like shows up. There's like physical proof that it's not all in our heads. And so For many of you, I think it's important to just pause and sit here because of sometimes the stigma or the shame that can come with this condition. And it's important for the people who love you and support you, who are also impacted, to understand that this is real. Let's go a little deeper with the science. So adding another layer here, and this slide is a little bit busy, but bear with me. You can see just a different depiction of how the hormones go up and down throughout the cycle. And when we look at what's actually happening in the brain of the menstrual cycle for someone with a non-PMDD brain versus someone with a PMDD brain, it makes a lot of sense. And so in general, that first half of the cycle, there's this rise in estrogen. Estrogen supports brain chemicals like our dopamine goes up, our serotonin goes up, insulin sensitivity improves. All of those help us feel more stable, more focused, more balanced mood, even appetite feels more manageable. And then there's these drops that happen, drops here, and then it drops again before the cycle. When these drops happen, and then there's this rise, this is important for PMDD, there's this rise in progesterone in the dark blue, that converts to a calming substance called aloe, and that acts on the GABA system. That's typically for non-PMDD brain folks, like slowing down the nervous system. It's like the brakes on the nervous system. This is different for people with PMDD. These changes can create like subtle emotional or physical shifts. There's heightened sensitivity, cravings, mood fluctuations, all of this. Going back, in people with a non-PMDD brain, these changes are still happening and they may be impacting them. So they may still have those subtle shifts. They may still have these symptoms in a minor way, but for PMDD folks, this is like seismic. It's a huge, huge impact. And most people are understanding now that PMS and PMDD are very, very different. PMDD is not just severe PMS. Biologically, they're caused by different things. So this is not about the hormones themselves. It's about how the brain's receptors are responding to the hormones. And in PMDD, what's happening is those receptors don't adapt properly. They don't regulate in the way that they're supposed to. So this means that those systems don't calm down. Those brain chemicals don't land effectively. And there's kind of an interesting thing that I've been looking into recently with newer information out there is for some people, there's disruptions in what's called glutamate. If you've ever heard of that, think of that as like the gas pedal in the nervous system instead of the brakes. And it's very excitatory. We need enough of it, but when it gets too loud, too much, it's overstimulating. It can drive racing thoughts, sometimes sensory sensitivity and panic. And what happens in people is they can't convert GABA to glutamate for various reasons. So that's another layer that I'm seeing. All right, coming back to this central message, it is biology, not a behavior choice. It's real, it's biological in nature. And this is, again, really important to just sit with this because it is real and it's not your fault. It's not a personality defect. I hear from so many people, sometimes they logically understand this. They logically understand this is a real condition, this is a real diagnosis, and now it's in the DSM and it's getting recognition, but they are still carrying that shame and that stigma silently. I did this for a long time. Sometimes I even still catch myself doing it where like, maybe I'm just too sensitive. Why can't I just keep it together? Why can't I keep up? So this just gets compounded even more so. This may have happened to some of you where you get dismissed, you get misdiagnosed, the conversation doesn't go as you plan at the doctor's office, and that can just, again, add to that shame and stigma. All right, so let's get into it. Now that we're all understanding like what's going on, what's driving this, why is nothing working? What's missing? And so if this is you, if you felt like, oh my gosh, I'm trying everything, I've tried X number of medications, I just want to emphasize again, stripping away that shame. It's not because you haven't tried hard enough. It's because the system at large, the medical system, society at large, aren't designed to see the whole you. They aren't designed to look at the full picture. Everything is looked at in silos. Every health condition has its own silo. Every symptom has its own silo, and that's part of the problem. So we'll talk about why so many treatments don't work, or sometimes they work and then they stop working, and what might be missing from the conversation entirely. All right, let's tackle this next. Birth controls and SSRIs. Just type in the chat if you've been on, or even if you want to type how many birth control types and SSRI types you've been on in total. For me, I think the number is like 7 or 8. I'd have to count. Just curious if you guys want to type in the chat. And this is so common. I expect to see some high numbers out there because the conversation often starts in the doctor's office. Hey, so you have PMDD. Which option would you like? Birth control or an SSRI? And birth control and SSRIs are still considered first line options. And it makes sense given that understanding of PMDD that we just went over. Let's talk about why and why this is still the first line option. Hormonal birth control is aimed at suppressing those hormonal fluctuations so that sensitivity theoretically doesn't take place. And SSRIs are geared at increasing serotonin, and they also act on that GABA system that we talked about. This is why they do work for some people. There's no med shaming here. After trying so many medications, I did find one that supports me that I can have in my back pocket if I need it. So for some people, they either help or at least partially help. I want to catch up on the chat here, and I'm curious. 5, 1, 5, 4. Yeah, and if you guys feel up to it, you can share how you responded to those and the impact that it had. And so again, they work for some people. For other people, they work partially. For other people, they don't. So we have to ask some deeper questions here. And what's interesting is that if this is you, you're not alone in it. 40% of people with PMDD don't fully respond to SSRIs or birth control. That's a big number. That's almost half. So I was certainly in that 40%. I don't know about you. And so if those treatments work for some, but not others, we have to ask what else is going on. For some, they can have a sensitivity to the synthetic hormones themselves, or they're sensitive to like the withdrawal of those hormones. For others, it's genetics. There's actually genetic variants that impact how we process medications, how we respond to SSRIs, how side effects show up. And there are certain gene patterns that I see regularly when we do genetic testing, or if someone brings in genetic testing from their psychiatrist, that show these patterns and they show that these genes are there. And yet, when something doesn't work, the common approach is this, and this may have happened to you as well. Okay, so the medication isn't working or it's not having enough of effect. Let's either switch the medication or increase the dose. Or sometimes a combination of both, and it goes on and on and on. Starts to feel like what I call like medication roulette, where it's just like stabbing in the dark. But very few people and providers are pausing to ask, why didn't it work? And is there something else going on underneath the surface? And that's the question that changed everything for me. Digging into that question is how I help people. And it's exactly where this root cause lens and approach begins. So if this is you, if you've tried things and it's made it worse or it hasn't helped, you're not alone. It's not your fault. It's very, very common. And it simply means that there's something deeper going on. And as I've been sharing, this was certainly my story. And for me, it wasn't the whole story. It wasn't just about getting a genetic test to identify the right medication. I had a whole other mix of things underneath the surface, from PCOS and IBS and depression and anxiety and all these other things that were playing into and like bringing the PMDD symptoms out of the woodwork. All right. So what if PMDD isn't one single thing? We share this diagnosis, but we're not all the same. And when I read this statement, this is a big PMDD researcher. She had said, one limiting factor for treatment development is the implicit assumption that PMDD represents a singular disorder with one pathophysiology. And there's studies digging into this. There's a study in 2019, and there was a new study in 2024 that are beginning to suggest something that many of us have felt for a long time. It's something I've been seeing in practice for a long time, that there are different patterns and we are not all the same. And there are many different actually subtypes that they're finding of PMDD with different symptoms that appear at different points in the cycle. So I'm going to show you a graphic from the research study on the next slide. It's a little overwhelming, but we'll make sense of it together. All right, so let's look at this fresh research and make sense of it. Before this study, most of the research was focused on the type of PMDD that shows up 2 weeks before the bleed, that full luteal phase, or we'll call it like half-life in the studies, because it impacts half of your life. And what they were finding is the treatments that work for that group don't work for the people that only have symptoms 1 week before their cycle, or they have it around ovulation and then right before their cycle, and it's like this on and off pattern. And so they were exploring this in 2019 and expanded on it in 2024. And it proposes something a lot of us already knew, that PMDD doesn't follow one uniform pattern. Instead, people have symptoms that spike at different times in the cycle and different types of symptoms. And so you can see here that the graph is a little bit backwards, where here's ovulation and here's the bleed. So the period starts here, you go to ovulation. Some people have this symptom spike, and then other people have another symptom spike around here in the week or two before luteal. And so curious to hear from all of you, when do you experience symptoms? When in your cycle? And if you experience that at like 2 distinct times, are those symptoms different? So for example, my PMDD pattern was irritability and rage around ovulation, and depression and darkness a few days before my bleed. So you want to pop that in the chat. So for some, and it's going to be, I'll explain a few scenarios. Some feel that irritability, like I was talking about around ovulation, sometimes sensory overload. Others experience that low mood right before they bleed. People, it lasts into the bleed, which can be a whole different picture, a whole different story. And some feel impulsivity or the rage and instability whenever there's like that estrogen spike. So the research so far hasn't translated this into what this means for treatment and how it can guide treatment. But in my opinion, and what I'm seeing already is that when we're able to identify these symptoms and patterns, it does help us get some clues at what's going on and personalize the approach a little bit more. And that pattern starts to tell me about someone's psychophysiology. Right. Keep going. The other thing of why sometimes things don't work is it can be more than PMDD. For some people, it's what's called PME. And actually 60% of us, it's not only PMDD alone, it is co-occurring with another condition. It could be anxiety, depression, ADHD, PTSD, etc. And if that's what you're experiencing, if that's the case for you, that can absolutely impact how your body responds to other treatments. In fact, there's randomized controlled trials that have found that people with PMDD don't respond as well to those first-line PMDD treatments like antidepressants and birth control, or even full hormonal suppression that some people do, as well as people without PME. So this is really, really important. Another big number, 60%. And so if these standard treatments have fallen flat, to me, it's because PMDD is not the only thing in the picture. There's more going on. All right. Anything to catch up on in the chat, Monica?
We have a lot of women sharing when they're experiencing symptoms, which is great. And I think I love hearing all of the different kind of specific symptoms that you guys are sharing. You know, fatigue, sensory overload, like that one is so real and relatable, whether it be light or sound. Those things are, I'm very sensitive to those as well. But I think this is really, really interesting information. I'm sure everyone listening as well can relate, just kind of really pinpointing when it is that as individuals we're experiencing symptoms, and everyone is just sharing theirs. So it's great.
Yeah, and the sensory overload piece is real. For me, I have pretty intense like noise sensitivity. And for me, I know like my genetics, and I've like looked into my own, PMDD puzzle. For me, it's related to that GABA and glutamate piece. And sometimes it's a nervous system response. If I'm overstretched, overworked, I have lower capacity in my nervous system. For me, my noise sensitivity is always there. And then if my PMDD symptoms are coming up, I'll have heightened experience of it during luteal. Or it's like on a spectrum depending on what's going on. All right, so let's just take a breather from the science for a bit and go over a tangible shift. And we'll be talking about a few tangible shifts that you can start today if they align with you. And this is one of them. And that starts with tracking your cycle differently to start to identify these patterns. And what I find is sometimes people are really diligent with their tracking apps, and tracking apps are great, but they're tracking so many symptoms that it starts to cloud the data, and they're not seeing the patterns across the cycle. It's just like, yep, I knew that was happening. And you just have this list of symptoms. And so I created a super simple tracker for you guys, and that's on the website. You can scan that QR code. but this type of tracking helps you connect the dots. And sometimes it can simplify things as well. I'll show you, and this is one of the parts that it has in there. You can see you can graph it along the cycle. And then the other thing that's really key here is if tracking feels like a lot, this is a really good place to start, where if your capacity is low and like even brushing your teeth feels like climbing Mount Everest, you're not going to want to do super detailed cycle tracking. And so I intentionally have spots for 4 symptoms on here, and you could print out sheets if you wanted to track 8, but starting with the ones that impact you the most can be really, really powerful. And then you can see you can measure the severity with these little dots. And that's helpful because sometimes when we're in the thick of it and we're like, oh, this symptom is still here, we're missing the ability to see that the severity has shifted if we've intervened with something or brought in a support. And so seeing that severity come down is really, really helpful and really motivating and hopeful as you're tracking. And then down here below, there's a little space to track, your whatever your personalized habit stack is, habits or interventions that you're bringing in to support yourself. You can look at the consistency and how they correlated with your symptoms. And then even sometimes I just scribble up here if I've had something that I know, impacts me, like a big stressor, or for me, like gluten exposures really trigger mood symptoms. I'll like mark it up here, whoops, gluten exposure, and I can see how many days later things start to impact me. So this gives us super, super valuable data, and we won't belabor this more because you can download it and there's a free guide that goes with it, but just wanted to show it too. So looking at this, it's not all about the symptoms. We have to look a little bit deeper underneath. All right. Jolene sharing, yep, gluten-free for 12 years. Gluten-free club. And it's not important for everyone with PMDD. For some people it is. I'll just add that side note. So I love to share this tree that I made with, common PMDD symptoms at the top. All of these symptoms that we associate with PMDD, your specific symptoms are going to look different. And what we're finding is it's not only about like the low serotonin or even the GABA stuff that we were talking about. And I think it's not even only about mood. There's a whole brain body systemic impact that's influencing PMDD. And so we have to look underneath the surface, which we'll go over next. And so this way, if the leaves are like your symptoms, the leaves of the tree, the soil is your genetics and other factors that come in, and the roots are other contributing factors that can play a role. And so think of this soil, we'll start there. That's what we're planted in, our genetics, our family history, our early experiences. And while we can't change those things, I want to emphasize they don't determine the whole story. PMDD, interestingly, has a heritability rate of 50 to 80%. And I find that to be very, very true. Like I suspect my mom had it and she didn't know. I hear this from clients all the time, and they'll start telling me, yes, my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, even though they never got diagnosed, this is what they remember. Very, very common. And so there are genes that can set this up, and there's gene variants that affect how we respond to hormones and stress and medications. But these genes don't act alone. This is the important piece. They interact with our environment, our history, and our experience. So you may have heard the expression, genetics load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. And so there's a lot that we can influence. And so here's the empowering part. We can actually change how we nourish those roots. So let's look at some examples. And this might look overwhelming at first. There's a lot here on the bottom, but I wanted to give you a full picture of potential possibilities and things that can factor in. But when we start to look at an individual person and what they have going on and how it's all connected, the next steps actually become simpler by looking at it this way versus complicated. It's not looking at histamine intolerance separate from nutrition insufficiency, separate from thyroid. They're all intimately intertwined. So I wanted to give you a few examples. We've talked about the glutamate piece that I think is really fascinating, that can lead to overstimulation and insomnia, that emotional reactivity for some people. For some people, there is a trauma element. I get asked this a lot. There can be a heightened stress response that kind of imprints in the nervous system and contributes to changes in the brain and like this chronic state of hypervigilance that can impact mood. Inflammation is a huge one, where inflammation doesn't just like cause body aches and brain fog. It actually disrupts how the brain makes chemicals and responds to them, and also those hormonal signals. It actually impacts things at that deepest level. So this is the essence. These are just a few examples, but the essence of a functional approach. It's not about treating the symptoms. It's about decoding the messages that the symptoms are sending. Right. Let's go over just a quick example from a client story. And this client, I put her symptoms at the top of her little tree. And she came to us, she had tried everything. She was even a dietitian herself. She had tried medications, multiple types of medications, therapy, supplements, diet changes, mindfulness. She was even a mindfulness and meditation teacher. Nothing was touching the symptoms the 2 weeks before luteal. Nothing was touching it. And she just had to keep making her life smaller and smaller and smaller just to survive. And it was like just piling on that shame we were talking about earlier. She couldn't show up in her career how she wanted, as a spouse, as a parent. It was really impacting everything. And so when we started working together, the first thing we did was map out her symptom pattern and her timeline. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when did the symptoms start? When did they worsen? What are the factors that contributed to this picture? And what we started to notice is that when she added certain supplements, for her specifically, it was like when she added in Vitex, it made her symptoms worse. And we discovered, like looking at, and this happens a lot in my work, like someone comes in and they're on 15 to 20 supplements, and it's super fun. It's my favorite hobby, like taking supplements out before we even change anything or add them in. That was the case for her. We started taking things out. We looked at her pattern, and what we found is things that had just been missed and overlooked. She had major blood sugar issues that were showing up on her blood work, even though she was eating a healthy diet, and she had histamine excess that was driving her mood swings and the fluid retention and the brain fog. And so for her, her symptoms were so severe that we took action pretty quickly. We did have her start a low histamine diet, but that was short term because that's kind of intense. Nobody wants to follow it long term. It can feel really restrictive, but we just had to help her take the edge off with the low histamine diet and histamine specific supplements. And you'll see in the next how quickly she got relief. And once she got that, she had capacity for us to dig a little bit deeper. She had more energy, more mental capacity for her to complete some testing. And what we found was she had suboptimal nutrient levels in a bunch of different areas. She had a lot of inflammation going on, and her genetics were fascinating. Her genetics were impacting even like her oxytocin, which can impact your sense of like calm and stability. And it's not only maternal instinct, and GABA and dopamine, and she had iron deficiency and histamine related genetics. And so we uncovered a lot, and we started to map out her plan and work through it slowly but surely, in a way that fit the capacity that she had. And so you can see here, her symptoms were, and this progress is not always this linear. It happened to be linear in this example where it was just down, down, down. And she was able to go from almost 50% reduction that first month, and by month 3 down to 97% improvement. And so I share this story not just to be like, wow, this is amazing and share hope, but it's really about looking at what was underneath. She had this breakthrough because we stopped chasing after it and chasing after each symptom, and we looked deeper to decode everything. And so each person has their own path. This is an example. There's no one size fits all, but there is a repeatable process. There is a way to gather data for us to figure out what your body's really asking for. All right, see some good questions coming in. I can't wait to get to them later. So let's recap what we've talked about so far, because what her story shows us, what I see every day, is that treatments don't fail because you didn't try hard enough. And I see this time and time again, that people are telling me, I've tried everything, and they give me the list of everything they've tried. It's not for lack of effort. Sometimes things don't work because they were not designed to support the full system, or then are not even addressing the right part of the system that's off for us. And so we've learned about so far how the brain responds to these hormone shifts, how they can be shaped by genetics, impacted by inflammation and histamine and all these other things. They impact how we respond to first-line treatments. And sometimes PMDD isn't the whole story. There's subtypes of PMDD, and there's the PME with other conditions playing a role. So the point is that we have to look at you as a unique individual and look at everything all together. All right. So let's keep going. Let me see how I'm doing on time. Okay, doing good. So now that we've seen what's at play, let's continue deepening this. And we're going to get into some other systems that can be imbalanced and symptoms of that, and what exact testing to get. And so really the path here, and what I want to emphasize again, is not chasing the symptoms. We have to start instead symptoms and looking at what's underneath. So you may have noticed as we looked at that tree that certain things were under there. You may have noticed there thyroid was mentioned, nutrient deficiencies, and blood sugar. And these things are commonly overlooked. And it's not that they cause PMDD directly, but they can intensify symptoms. It can create the perfect storm that worsens the PMDD symptoms. So we'll go over the symptoms for each of these areas as clues, and they're clues to dig deeper and investigate. And just again, little disclaimer, this is about curiosity, not diagnostics. And if you look at the chart and you're like, wow, I have 75% of those, it doesn't mean you're a hot mess. It likely means that there's multiple symptoms impacted. And again, it's all connected. And when we discover those connections, things actually get simpler. So let's take a look. Just want to give you guys, while I take a sip of water, a chance to look at these different layers. And you can go layer by layer and see what resonates with you. And again, these are not causes, but contributing factors that can weave in and contribute to PMDD. And there's more symptoms than this that can relate to a certain area, but I wanted to give you guys an initial snapshot of some of these different systems. And if you guys want to type in the chat, which ones are standing out to you? Maybe your top 3 sections, or if you're like, oh my gosh, all of it, or if it's one primary section, just curious to hear. Blood sugar. As you guys are typing, I find like lately I've been struggling with my appetite, and we're remodeling our kitchen. So I haven't been eating enough. I haven't been eating very well. And I've been feeling really, really anxious. And even though I'm talking about blood sugar all the time to all the people, I like minimized it for myself. I was like, that not eating for 7 hours couldn't possibly be making me feel so anxious. And I'm reminded to take a dose of my own medicine. Yeah, nutrients, blood sugar, the first 3 to 4, nutrients, blood sugar, inflammation, gut health, and histamine. And there's been a really big interest in the histamine connection lately, thanks to a viral TikTok video about Pepsid AC, which I think is great that it's bringing awareness. I want to share that it can be hugely impactful for people. I just shared with that client story. It is part of my PMDD story. I have major histamine genetics and reactions, but it's not every single person with PMDD that has that. And there's a, Monica, I don't know if you can grab it. There's a really in-depth blog article on our blog about histamine and root causes that goes super in-depth into the science for anyone who wants it. Yeah, thank you guys for sharing in the chat. Hormones. So most of us are not dealing with just one layer. We're dealing with 2 or 3 or more overlapping layers. And the good news is that there are things that we can test and explore to support these systems. And so let me see. I'm going to go over a few of them here. And if you guys want to snap a picture of this slide, that is totally fine. But yeah, a few dots here depending on what you're seeing. So nutrients, we have, and Monica can post it in the chat, some little short videos that explain how nutrients impact our brain chemistry. And I find time and time again that the clients, when we actually test nutrient levels and look at symptoms together, they're super depleted in certain B vitamins or magnesium or iron or all these things. And that impacts how we metabolize and make our brain chemicals and our hormones. A big, big role. Blood sugar, for some people, they have blood sugar stuff going on all cycle long, and then it worsens during luteal because of those shifts in estrogen and how they impact insulin sensitivity. For some people, it's only present during luteal. And it can really trigger those cravings, energy crashes, fatigue, irritability, that like hangry feeling. The inflammation connection is very, very fascinating. We talked about that a little earlier. And of course, the gut-brain connection. There's a reason it's called our second brain. I have an interesting PMDD client where we uncovered she had major nutrient deficiencies, like insane B12 deficiency, among other things. And then we looked at her genetics that predispose her to gut health issues. And then we actually did a stool analysis and found she had like big like gut pathogens and parasites and all these things, and it's all driving her symptoms. And so even if there's one thing here like the nutrient insufficiencies, that can have its own little root cause tree that can be playing a role. And the gut imbalances can really disrupt mood, whether things like a parasite, or there can be certain bacteria that are histamine producers or activate mast cells. All factors in. And thyroid. How many of you are noticing thyroid symptoms? This is one where I get a little frustrated. It is hard to get doctors to do a full thyroid test because of insurance coverage. And so what can happen is sometimes people will recognize these symptoms of like, I'm super fatigued, I'm depressed, I'm constipated, I'm losing my hair. My mom has hypothyroidism and they're begging essentially to get it tested. They get their TSH tested and it's normal, but they're not actually testing the full like thyroid hormone cascade that looks at the actual hormone levels, and it's being missed. When we look at the full picture, we can see those things developing sooner and see what's maybe driving the thyroid issue itself. So that's a really huge one. And then hormones. This is a big one. So even though we covered before that PMDD is a sensitivity to normal hormone levels, I do find, and this was the case for me, that clients can have hormonal imbalances layered in. For me, it was I had high DHEA and high testosterone, and part of it was worsened by birth control. Some of it was from overtraining, like lifting too many weights and not eating enough years ago. And then some of it was genetics. Even though I've started to correct those things, I still have a slight PCOS pattern just because my genetics are impacting me. So that's one example. People can have estrogen excess. They can have high DHT. There's a lot of things that can play in, and it absolutely can impact mood. And depending on what hormonal imbalance, it can present with different symptoms. For some people, it can be painful or heavy periods and feeling depressed. And for other people, it can feel like aggression, rage, and irritability, depending on what's going on. But I hope that was helpful. Thank you guys for sharing in the chat. And so that brings us to immediate shift number 2, stop guessing. So what's the alternative to not chasing these symptoms? It's actually gathering data, taking the wheel and looking a little bit deeper. And I wanted to, before we go into all this, I wanted to share this quote from Dr. Mark Hyman, because it highlights this intimate connection between the brain and the body. And so he says, addressing the underlying imbalances in your body that cause brain dysfunction will allow you to venture more deeply and successfully into the exploration of your mind and soul. And so I like to cheesily say we blend science and soul in what we do. And when the body is not functioning, it is hard to access those deeper layers of yourself. It's hard to give your all in therapy. It's hard to even have the resilience to process your trauma or do EMDR therapy or whatever else. We have to create the stability and safety in the body. And that really serves as the foundation for the rest of exploring you. So why do we need data? And we'll talk about what these layers of data look like. It helps connect the dots. It helps cut out the guesswork, and it helps us be more strategic. So we're not stabbing in the dark. We're actually taking streamlined, really intentional steps for relief. So I created this roadmap, and I want to just focus on this top part here because you all are already collecting data. You are already likely tracking symptoms in some way. Even if you're not writing them down, you're mentally observing them. That's still data. All of you were able to post in the chat. You had some awareness around that PMDD pattern, what your symptoms are when they're showing up. Perhaps you're journaling, you're taking written or mental notes, and then perhaps you're noticing that there's cyclical shifts that are happening. All of this is incredibly valuable and important. The other thing is that you have data. I don't have this on the slide. I should add a little box here. You have data on your health history. That's that timeline I was talking about. What happened when? So I want to just pause here and you can ask yourself, this is a super helpful question I ask every potential new client that applies to work with us. When did everything start? When did everything shift? If you want to think about that. Was there a trigger, a season of high stress, a hormonal transition, another health event or trigger or life event where all of a sudden things started or got worse? And you can share in the chat if you want, or you can just kind of reflect on that on your own. Yeah, someone's posting postpartum. Postpartum is a really, really common trigger. We covered that in a recent video on Instagram, and I have another Instagram post on that. The few times a year I post on Instagram, you'll find it there. Um, so that timeline that we're talking about holds really, really important clues. It can help us start to connect the dots and figure out where to begin. And so gathering that type of data first through your timeline and the symptom tracking and the patterns helps us actually then go to the next level. It helps us prioritize what type of testing is most important for you rather than testing everything under the sun. A lot of people will come to me and they'll say, Mandy, I want to test my hormones. And I'll say, wait, let's hold that decision and go and look at all this other information we have so we can make sure we're using your testing budget wisely and that we're getting information that will help us right now. For a lot of people, that starts with blood work. I'll give you the exact blood work panel I order on the next slide. But it's going to be different for each person. Not everyone needs every single test. But the blood work is absolutely essential. It helps us look at all of those other layers we just went through in that table to make sure that there's no major metabolic barriers standing in the way of relief. So if you guys want to take a quick screenshot of this, if you want it, this is the blood work panel I order for most of my clients. Sometimes I'm fine tuning it or adding things or taking things away depending on their health history. But I call it the Warrior Essentials panel. And this is a top priority. And these markers help us look at those layers we were talking about, nutrients and inflammation and glucose, things that little hints around digestion, even before we do the stool test, things that impact detox pathways and hormones like thyroid and testosterone and other things. And so if you're working with a practitioner or a doctor, you can use this information to advocate for what you want tested. And I'm going to give you a little dose of reality in doing that we'll talk about. But just knowing this and knowing what to ask for can help spark that conversation. But sometimes doctors are not able to order all of this because it's not medically necessary or because insurance doesn't cover it. And sometimes getting all of this through insurance can actually cost more because they're right. It's not medically necessary. They're not testing this stuff, or we're not testing this stuff to diagnose anything or go towards a medical treatment. We're taking this big picture root cause look. And so I share that because some people get really frustrated or mad at their doctor when it's really just an issue with the system. And so that's why a lot of people do have to go out of pocket. And sometimes, like I said before, it's even cheaper. So if you need help accessing this type of panel, you can grab my contact information at the end. If you're dialing in from the UK, I can't order directly from there, but I found some lab companies in the UK that have really good pricing. All right. So you are not broken. I just want to settle with this message. Your cycle isn't the enemy, it's a guide. And so far we've talked about testing, timelines, ways to start gathering data. But this message all today, we're talking about investigating all this stuff. I want to clarify that it's not about fixing you. This is about restoring balance, restoring your capacity gently and strategically, because it's so normal when we're in the depths of these symptoms and it's so painful and it impacts so many areas of our life that we just want it to go away. We want to fix it. We want it to end. And for me, for many years, I felt like, oh, if I could just fix this, if I could figure it out, like the right supplement, the right protocol. But what I learned was I really didn't need to be fixed, and neither do you. Your body holds this wisdom, and your symptoms are simply messengers. And all of this is about restoring you so you can come back home to yourself. So that brings me to our last shift, and then we'll transition to questions. Stop doing it all. Do less. Sometimes it's not about doing more and more lifestyle things or more nutrition interventions or more supplements. Sometimes it's about doing less. And this isn't giving up, it's strategically slowing down. And so if you've tried a lot of things and still haven't found relief, sometimes doing so much at once is part of the problem. And especially if our system is already overwhelmed. Or perhaps I have a little joke here. It's not you, it's me, sincerely your protocol. Sometimes the protocol wasn't right for you. It simply wasn't aligned to what your body needs. We see countless people that have worked with multiple, naturopaths or doctors or other practitioners, but it wasn't truly root systems based. And so they were doing a lot of things that didn't actually move the needle. And so this is why we want to make changes that meet you where you are, that honor your capacity. And we're going to talk a little bit about that capacity next. And so these next few things that we'll talk about are really, really important because they start to build safety in your body, safety in your cycle, and even trust with yourself. So let's talk about that. I'm wondering, we'll go over this super quick and then we'll shift to questions. So I might shorten this part if we need to. So I like to give this example. You can see two buckets here. During our cycles, we have a shift in capacity. From a science perspective, there's like this reduced biological resilience during luteal. We can handle less. Our bucket fills up easily. So if we have like stressors going into the bucket, we can handle more different types of stressors, mental, emotional here, and less during luteal. And so our system is more easily overwhelmed, more easily activated, and we can have a harder time settling once it's triggered. So once you understand this, it can help you set goals in the beginning in a way that honors your capacity. So let's take a look at that. This is an example of stressors that can go in, and your list of what's going in the bucket is going to be different. And then things that help it go out, your toolbox of things that help clear the stressors from your bucket are going to be different. And so you can just reflect or maybe jot down a note of what's filling your bucket, what stressors are going in. Primary stressors. I had to throw perfectionism on there because that's one of my, I've been realizing how much my perfectionism impacts my stress still. For some people, it's physical stressors. These things can go in. And then think about if you already have tools that you know that help to empty your bucket, that help to manage the stress on your system based on your capacity. You may already know. So as you think about this, we can ask, like, where do I start? What is one small step that your nervous system can say yes to? One small actionable thing that builds capacity so you can actually do the next thing. And I'm going to give you some examples. And I want you to keep that thing that first popped into your mind before even seeing this list. Trust that thing. That's probably the right one. For me, it's I like moved countries, and so for me, my number one thing that's going to support me next is getting back to weightlifting. I know that's my next step. So think about what that is for you. Here's some small examples. For some people, it might be a high quality multivitamin. For others, it's like simplifying your supplements, removing supplements that might be hurting more than they're helping, adding in a little extra protein at breakfast, these small things. And our brains want to believe that these small changes don't make a difference, or they don't make enough of a difference, that we have to try harder, push harder to get to where we want to go. But the opposite is actually true. When we honor where we are now, we stop pushing, we can start bailing water from that bucket and take it one step at a time. And just like I explained with that client story, it actually gives us capacity to then do the deeper work. Right. So the fight and track differently, stop guessing, and gather data, stop doing it all, stop doing too much, and honor your capacity. So we will take questions now. This is how to connect with me. There's little QR codes if you guys want to download the free resources. If you're feeling aligned with this approach and you want to connect with me, pick my brain to see if we'd be a good fit, here's a link to schedule a strategy session. And that's the appointment where we would talk about your symptom pattern, decide on your assessments, decide if we're a good fit. So that is there for you. And Monica, let's check in on questions.
Okay. The chat has been firing. So
I know. And I was trying not to look at it, so I kept getting distracted, but I'm anxious to see.
and there's been a lot of links shared in the chat, so I will do my best as well to kind of collect those. And when I send the recap email out, I'll try to share all of those, because we did share some links out to some Instagram posts and to some podcasts and to a couple blog posts. So hopefully all of that we can get grouped together and out in the recap. But I do want to dive into some of these questions. Okay, question number one for you, Mandy. Why do my symptoms, irritability, sensory overload, happen at the start of both ovulation and luteal phase? And there's a follow-up question to that, but let's start there.
Ooh, do you want to tell me both questions? Because that does it factor in?
No, the second question is more about a specific supplement, so.
Okay. Yeah, when I call that the on and off pattern, or it's like a combination pattern where For some people, it's correlating. Let me see if I can get back to that slide. It's correlating with those estrogen peaks. So depending on what else, sorry guys, if I'm making you dizzy. So if it's happening right here, maybe if she can clarify, I'll give both scenarios. If it's happening like before ovulation, if you have like a device or you know your body's signs, and it correlates with those estrogen peaks, for some people that's related to like it being a histamine trigger. In the blog article and the podcast, we talk about the estrogen histamine relationship. And that can be a factor. For other people, they have genetics or other things that make them sensitive to the increases in serotonin and dopamine. So as estrogen goes up, serotonin and dopamine are going up. And for some people, that causes excess of those, and their brain receptors can't adjust to that. And they end up with too much of those. It's not always low serotonin or low dopamine. You can have too much, and that can lead to that irritability, insomnia, all those things, feeling super agitated. I personally have genetics that slow my processing of those things. So it's almost like I feel like I'm gonna like crawl out of my skin, or I need to like escape my body, just like agitated or anxious for not even any specific reason. If it's connected to the estrogen drop, where it's like before that bleed, maybe lingers into the bleed, or like this post ovulation, sometimes that's the estrogen withdrawal that like destabilizes the serotonin and dopamine receptors. So that's another scenario depending on when it's actually happening. Good question. What was the second part of the question?
Okay, the next is more supplement specific, but she asked if how you feel about organ meat supplements supporting PMDD symptoms.
This is an interesting one. And there can be benefits to organ supplements, but I'll just share. I've had a handful of clients more than a handful that have come in and they've either told me I'm spending a lot of money on these supplements and they haven't made a difference, or some where they made them more anxious. And I'm trying to figure out specifically why. And I don't know the answer to that yet. I've actually been researching that in the past few weeks because I've seen it pop up in a few clients. So I don't have a firm stance on it. I am gathering information, and I'm looking at it client by client to what that means for them. But I don't, as a general rule, say clients with PMDD should be on organ-based supplements. Typically, I find I need a little bit more precision with how much of a certain nutrient I want to bring in the more absorbable form. So for me, and any paleo-minded dietitian out there might disagree with me, but they're not my first go-to. Not that they're bad, but I haven't found them to be a game changer.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, next question. How would you go about doing testing to pinpoint if your PMDD are more histamine intolerance related? So how do we determine if that root cause is histamine for someone?
Yeah. So sometimes the symptoms themselves and the symptom pattern are the first clue. And not for some people, it's what that other person was asking, where they have that heightened anxiety, irritability. Or we're looking for other symptoms, and the blog goes over this, but it might be the breast tenderness or brain fog. Some people do get the classic symptoms of like the itchiness and the like sore throat or the congestion. Not everyone with histamine issues has that. I always remind people of that. Some people get and this happens to me, of like, if I scratch my skin, I get raised red marks. So those are some initial clues. And sometimes what I'll do is, a lot of people have been talking about and asking about like Pepcid and Zyrtec and antihistamines. Sometimes I'll have people do those short term to see if it helps. And if they don't help, it doesn't mean it's not a histamine issue. They can not help for various reasons. But if they do help, it can give a little confirmation. And it doesn't mean they're the long-term solution. There can be downsides to using them long-term, but it can say, we're onto something. And then we can start to peel back the layers of what is underneath that, genetics and gut stuff and all these other factors that can impact it. So hopefully that answers that question.
That kind of rolls into another question of like, someone asked both on the Pepcid, I believe is what you said, as well as histamines. Are there long-term effects, or is it safe for long-term use if it's helping them?
Yeah, I wonder if we could link to a video. I have like a 10-minute video that goes over this in depth, but there can be depending on what you're using, if someone's using it all the time, there's a reduction in stomach acid, which I'm not a fan of because we need enough stomach acid to absorb nutrients. There can be shifts in our like histamine receptors that might not be favorable. And the thing to remember is that the antihistamines are blocking, think of it as like your histamines, like the car driving around and it has a parking spot. They're blocking the parking spot, like putting a traffic cone in front of it. They're not actually clearing out histamine. So for some people, when they stop taking it, they have like a rebound effect where that histamine's all still there. The receptors, the parking spots have gotten messed up and they'll have increased symptoms. So yeah, there can be downsides. Some people do safely use them long-term. Sometimes it's a primary treatment for mast cell activation syndrome before they go to the more advanced meds. And so, yeah, it really depends on the person. And I always keep in mind, and this is the case with any medication, if it's really, really helping you, the same, you know, with birth control or whatever it may be, then we can like circumnavigate any potential downsides and support your body through that too. So yeah, hopefully that answers, and I can pull that other video if people want it.
Cool. We talked, we mentioned gluten a little bit in there today, and someone asked, what's the gluten connection? They've never really put that together and realizing that they feel better without it.
Mm. Yeah, and like I was saying before, it is really individual. There's not like a researched established connection. For some people, I find it's related to how it impacts our gut lining. And when we have a leaky gut or impacts to our gut lining, things can leak through and that can impact the brain and drive inflammation, which impacts mood. For other people, and hopefully this isn't getting too into the weeds, for some people, it just drives inflammation that impacts the brain. For other people, they respond to opioid-like compounds in gluten, like drug-like compounds that are in gluten and dairy. They're caseinomorphins in dairy, gluteomorphins in gluten, and that can have like a neuroexcitatory, like brain effect. And even when they take gluten out, I see this in my clients. There's a test that we look at that looks at this called the wheat zoomer. When they take it out, when they take out gluten or dairy, if these markers are showing up, they actually experience withdrawal, like withdrawing from a drug. It's crazy. And so we have to do it very slowly. So that's another layer that can be playing a role. For other people, it can trigger the histamine stuff. For some people, it can trigger autoimmune type things. For other people, it can trigger issues with something called GAD1. It has to do with like the glutamate and GABA stuff. So maybe more science than you wanted, but the point is it not a direct research connection with PMDD, but can affect a lot of other layers of that root cause tree. And each person is individual. And so what I recommend for people is if you have a family history of autoimmune or celiac, or you have celiac genetics or genetics that predispose you to celiac, you might want to do some testing first before you go on a gluten-free diet. And then if you want to test it out, you want to give it a full trial. And people don't like this answer, but a minimum of a month, like all in taking it out, or sometimes even up to 3 cycles to see the full impact. And then you can add it back in to see how it impacts you. So hopefully that helps. That was kind of a long answer.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, this one I did share in the chat that we talked about this in the special PMDD month podcast that went live today. So that full recording is available for everyone. But someone asked if you're already having hormonal dysfunction, specifically in progesterone and testosterone, could those be causing more severe PMDD symptoms?
In my opinion, yes. And I shared pieces of my story that was a major factor for me. And it was driving and I see this in clients where we think of like, let's say high testosterone causing aggression and irritability, but sometimes there's this mixed response where testosterone is important for women, not just for muscle mass and such, but it can impact like motivation and libido. And what will happen is they have high testosterone levels, and what their body says is like, ooh, there's too much of this. I'm going to take away some of those parking spots, some of those receptors. And they can have this strange mix of high and low testosterone symptoms of like irritability, aggression, and low libido. And they ask me like, why don't I have high libido? Or I used to have high libido and now it's low, but their labs still show the high testosterone. So in my opinion, it can. There's It's not a primary treatment for PMDD, but there's certain things that impact androgen metabolism with like DHT and PMDD related medications. I'm curious to see what research comes out because I see a lot of PMDD clients that have high testosterone, high DHT, which is like a super potent form of testosterone almost. So I'm very curious about that and I see it a lot. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on the topic of hormones, someone asked, how do you recommend getting your hormones tested? My doctors always seem reluctant because of the different fluctuations throughout the cycle. So this is a great question, basically asking about
Mhm.
timing.
Yeah, so the example panel that I showed you guys, I test that early in the cycle, like early follicular, between like days 3 to 7-ish, because I'm looking at, and this is specifically if someone has irregular cycles or we suspect PCOS or the high testosterone. I want to see it at that point because it looks at the hormone signals, LH and FSH. This is in blood work. Progesterone and estrogen can be helpful in blood work, but I don't do it that often because of the fluctuation. Sometimes when I see what's going on, I'll either look at hormone metabolites, like a Dutch test or a HUMAP test, to look at like how is that estrogen it's not just high or low, how is it being metabolized to different types? Because what we can influence with a holistic approach is like the enzymes between the hormones. We can think about why is that enzyme like too active or not active enough, and that's what we can influence with like nutrition and supplements and such. So I typically start with the blood markers to rule things out, and then if I need to, I'll dig in deeper with like a urine metabolite test. If someone's on hormone therapy, depending on the type, like the type of hormone therapy you're on, whether it's like oral or cream or whatever, can also influence the type of hormone test that you should get. So that's another factor. Sometimes it's saliva, sometimes it's not.
So you're saying test early follicular, but that's because you're not necessarily looking at progesterone and estrogen as in its role with PMDD. You're looking more at testosterone. Am I understanding right?
Yeah, so if I want, for the first look, I'll look early in the cycle. If I want to test estrogen and progesterone, I will do that mid-luteal. So it might be like 5 to 7 days after ovulation, 5 to 7 days before ovulation. So if I'm testing that picture, estrogen, progesterone balance, I'll do mid-luteal as a different test, either through blood or sometimes the hormone metabolites. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It's like two separate timings.
Totally. Makes sense. And I think even to speak to, she said, my doctors seem reluctant because of the fluctuations. Traditional doctors, I would say, don't have the tools to fully understand that timing. And that's why like working with a functional doctor like Mandy or,
Not a
someone
doctor.
else, they have a deeper understanding of the cycle and what they'd be looking for in those different timing windows that maybe like your OBGYN they just don't have those tools, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've had a doctor, like, I was like asking for all these things, and she was like, I don't even know how to interpret that. And I like told her what I do, and she was comfortable ordering them. But I've had doctors who are like, I'm not going to order that because I don't know what to do with it. And that's very, very common. Sometimes I ask for like obscure markers on like copper and zinc balance, and their doctors won't order it because they've never heard of it before. And again, it's like in their mind, it's not medically necessary. So it can be frustrating, but it's also understandable on their part.
Yeah. And I think just going into some of those situations or appointments with your doctors and understanding that like they have very specialized understanding in terms of most OBGYN have been very well trained to deliver babies. And unfortunately not to manage or support menstrual disorders at all.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and
So
I explain it as like we wear different hats. And when you
yeah.
are wanting someone to wear a hat that's not theirs to wear, like then you'll be frustrated with the result. And so sometimes there's that reality check of I wouldn't expect my therapist to do my OBGYN's job or to do someone like me, like do my job. So I think it's
Yeah.
important to remember the role that people play on your healthcare team.
And it also makes sense for us to not understand that as consumers of healthcare because
Yeah.
we just haven't been taught it. So hopefully this message can get spread wider and the frustration can start to be alleviated a little bit by us understanding who the right person to go to is with these questions. And then we can get frustrated at like why it's not covered by healthcare, but that's a different topic.
Yeah. Well, and I always tell people to look for your healthcare team, a doctor that supports like your efforts to advocate for yourself, that they have an open mind to support the other things you're doing versus dismissing it. That's a very, very big difference where even if they don't know, they can still be supportive of the other things that you're bringing in. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know that a couple more questions have like flown in, but I'd love for us to kind of wrap up. And Mandy, please share where everyone can find you. I know we did share the link to your strategy session, and we will send that out via email as well.
yeah, absolutely. Here's the links again. Yeah, and if you guys, if you just follow this in link, this goes to my website. There's a little contact form if you want to ask another question that we didn't get to, or just share how this was for you, the impact that it had. I would love to hear from you. As you can tell, I care a whole lot about this. I care about this community, and so I always love to hear from everyone. And we are real humans on the other side of our email responding, me or my assistant. So feel free to drop us a note, or if I meet you on Zoom for a strategy session, even better.
Thank you
Thank you.
everyone for spending your Wednesday afternoon or evening with us. If you have feedback or comments, definitely come and either chat with us over at Maria Wellness or Mandy. And we would love to continue the conversation and answer any questions that you have. We're so grateful to be able to share this with you. And I am so grateful for your time today, Mandy. Thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing knowledge.
Glad to be here. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone.